Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I am a senior world designer that has been working on Lord of the Rings Online for many, many years now. For those of you that are unfamiliar with these streams, this is kind of an in-development developer stream where I run around the world of Middle-earth, talk about what's going on and how we make it, how we make the landscape, what goes into the planning, pre-production, all of that stuff, building to build the world that you all enjoy and play in. This stream is world design focused, so I'm not going to be answering any questions regarding things like PVMP, server lag, what's going on with downtime. Those sorts of things are outside of my lane. I tend to stay focused on level design, world design, and housing. So if you have any questions about those things, feel free to ask them here in chat. So today we're continuing our series of streams that take us through the roads of Middle-earth. We started out, originally, this is our fourth one, we started out with the first one going from Ered Luin all the way to Ironfold, and I underestimated how long that would take, so I had to speed things up. And then for future ones, kind of going a little bit slower, our first leg of our north-south journey in Middle-earth was from way up north in Foreshell, all the way down to Isengard. From Isengard, for the third one, we went from Isengard all the way here to Linhir, and today we are going from Linhir all the way to the furthest reaches of Anfalas and Penith Gelen. So I hope you all have your popcorn, your drinks. I know I've got mine. If I've been talking for a while, let me know so I can take a drink. And let's get ready to explore the roads of Middle-earth. All right. Let's see. Saw someone saying I'm not hearing you, but then validated that it was on their end. Awesome. All right. So when we last left off, we were here at the gates to Linhir. This was a fun little tease because we released King's Gondor, which was meant to represent the post-War of the Ring version of Gondor. Showing it as it's starting to be reconstructed and whatnot. But we released it in two separate regions. The first region being King's Gondor East, which took us all the way up to basically this gate here in Linhir. And there's another one a little bit up here as well. Those were both blocked off, and some of the landscape was blocked off using bushes, very, very sturdy, dense bushes. And then when we released the Corsairs of Umbar expansion pack, we opened up this region here, so King's Gondor West, as well as the region of Anfalas and regions of Anfalas and Penith Gelen. So a lot more for us to go heading to the west. We have a goat that is just living his best life up there, as goats do. Every so often we will get bugs that are like, this crocodile is climbing up this tree, or this warg is way up high on the rock, how did it get there? I think for the goats, I'm going to say this is by design. They are known to just climb up everything, so we'll continue on and ignore the goat standing on the catapult. Not sure if they're going to actually launch him. Alrighty, let's keep going. So Dogs 2018 says, can we ask about sunsets and sunrises? You are welcome to ask about sunsets and sunrises. If you have a question, feel free to put it in chat. I will do my best to answer it when I take pauses as we're running around through here. We're going to hit a point too where I'm going to ask you all to decide which direction we end up going, because the way the Gondor map works is, we kind of get to this point and then we'll need to decide, do we go north? Do we go south? What way do we go to proceed through the Gondors? This whole area here is actually somewhat new as a part of King's Gondor. We did some work to kind of pull down the mountains that were here and kind of introduced, a whole new little mini area that wasn't in the original Belfalas landscape. So away we go. Let's see. So Full Delol says, wouldn't it be an idea to have bonus speed when taking roads instead of going straight through the world? I think we had actually considered that a while ago, but there wasn't at the time a really good way to manage that without a lot of hand placement along the roads. We don't have a way, we can tie like particle effects and whatnot to being on certain surfaces, but we don't have a way really to tie things like movement speed and whatnot to that. Um, and if there was a way to do that, we'd have to be careful about how we use our terrain textures, because a lot of our road terrain textures we sometimes end up using in addition to being on the roads, doing other things with them, like, oh hey, this road looks like it might make a nice scree. Let's noise that in a little bit here and there to kind of add a little bit of extra detail. And if the movement speed effect was tied to standing on the terrain texture itself, you might find yourself just like running along a cliff and then getting a speed boost that you weren't expecting to get and then launching yourself off the cliff, right? So it would be something that would be an interesting idea if we had a way to reliably do it without requiring a lot of work on our end, and also without it bleeding into areas of the world where we don't really want it to be. Um, Alrighty, so here we are. We're at a crossroads here, and this is the crossroads I mentioned. So, chat, if you're paying attention, and you want to have some input, do we go north up into the Ringlow Vale, or do we head towards Belfalis? We will get up into like Ethring and whatnot if we go north, take us into Lamadon. If we stay and head towards Belfalis, it'll take us into the mountains here. So we would probably potentially skip that, or actually something we could do is we could go to the west here into the mountains and then north, and we might avoid Ringlow Vale, but then we could loop up and around. How does that sound? Alrighty, west it is. First person chimed in, Pont Finbury, you decided we are going west. So west it is. And we're going to go back down this way because I was heading north. One of the things with this region, both of the King's Gondor regions, that was really enjoyable too, was to kind of take a look at how we had built the regions previously and see how we could refresh them. We wanted to make sure that the regions represented a different time of year, because that's what they do. All of our regions are sort of time locked. So we wanted to make sure that we represented a different time of year. We also, build the world in a different way compared to, how we did when we were building Gondor. We try to put a bit more detail into things like the cliffs and whatnot here. So that was an opportunity for us to kind of look at those spaces and see if we can add some extra detail to them. We didn't end up bringing those back into the original Gondors, and that could be a little tricky, since that wasn't our original plan and since we had opened up so much space. So suddenly things could start floating, or quest objects could change, like those sorts of things. So we were hesitant to bring things back because of that. Are there any plans? Aubrey says, are there any plans to move the stars further away so they're not in front of the moon anymore? I think the way to explain it is they're all in layers. So technically, the moon layer is above the stars, but depending on the time of day, the transparency of the moon, because we don't just like blink the moon on and off, we like fade it in and fade it out over different times of day, may make it appear such that the stars are over it, because you can kind of see through it even just like a little bit. It's not ideal, but that's sort of how it works in the back end. Dogs 2018 says, "Where did you get the steed?" Guessing a coffer, as I've never seen it before. I got it by looking it up in our game files and creating it and just using it. But I believe this and the cosmetic that I'm using is from a supporter pack that we had released last year or earlier this year, one of the two. So here we are. We are in the. Let's see. Let me bring up my map too, because I might want to go. Why don't we go this way, and we'll kind of run past Dol Amroth, do the Havens of Belfalas, and then go up into Lamadon. I like that idea. Though I might have to increase my speed a little bit in order to get everywhere that I want to get in this stream. Getting up into these mountains was something that, we wanted to, when we were building out King's Gondor, we didn't want it to just be a complete rehash of the places you had been in original Gondor. We wanted to find opportunities and spaces to add something new that is available to explore. We did that in the first half of King's Gondor as well. We wanted to continue through with it here. And so these mountains were one of the places that we decided, hey, like let's add that here. And this is a substantial amount of space, and I'm glad we were able to get some content put in here. The general idea for this and some of the other spaces that we did expand on and add was less so about having them be content dense spaces, and more about having them be places where players could kind of go and explore, find a little glen that they just wanted to hang out at, or spark some imagination and get into role-playing mode in these spaces that so without having to worry about the weight of content further out like this too. Not that content, the weight of content's probably not the right way, without having to worry about the the drive to complete everything in the area, when this area is fairly light as far as those things go, so you can kind of more do what you want in the space. Do you want to deed? Do you want to role play? Do you want to explore? I think for me, as I've been playing MMOs for 25 years now. I think for me, one of the things that I found really enriching about some of the original MMOs out there was there was a lot of exploration, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of content purpose for that exploration, if that makes sense. So you're kind of exploring these places on your own. You're seeing what's here, and you're kind of adventuring into these spaces, and having things to do in spaces can certainly be rewarding, but I also think having spaces that don't really have much in them, but there's something that you've discovered, is a rewarding experience as well. Let's see. Get That says, do you or any other developers play the live version of the game in your free time? I don't have as much free time as I used to. Particularly this summer seemed ridiculously busy. And the volume of new games that is coming out is daunting, and has been daunting for years. Having a family, it's hard to find all the time. I do make time to play Lotro, not as much as I used to back in the day when I didn't have family commitments and whatnot. But I still play. My goal right now, it's been, where am I at? I think I need to finish the current Song of Waves of Wind. That's where I'm at now. I have a few more quests left to that. I've just been kind of like slowly playing along. I am one of the slowly play along players. I'm not one of the like get to cap and do the instances players. Twin Bren says you can never go wrong staying in the mountains, in my opinion. Mountains are like mountainous areas are some of my favorite. I still really enjoy what we created with the Vales of Anduin, the Wells of Langflood, and Elderslade. I think that trio, that valley going up from Bjorningus up, I think is awesome. It feels great to me. It's one of my favorite areas. Let's see. Also, I want to know. I want to ask if you and any other designers put Easter eggs in the game that have yet to be discovered. Um, I'm not sure. I would say keep looking and look a lot, and maybe you'll find one. He says not knowing at all if there are ones that haven't been discovered yet. Lionheart asks, I wondered if you've seen the fan-made maps of Lotro and if you have any opinions on them. I'm assuming this is in particular there. I forget the name of the person who created it, but there is a map that is kind of a like predictive map of the world of Middle Earth, as far in terms of Lotro, where they are predicting different regions could be. I think those are great for instilling conversation. Like there is a massive thread on the forums that is all about thinking about what we're building next, what areas we could fill in. Like that is a really like fun and interesting thread. I think the risk with those, and I'm not saying that the person who makes that should stop making it. I think it's a beautiful map. It looks great, and it's a great conversation piece. The risk is, particularly when it is talked about very heavily in a official space, like on our forums, that people will see it and take it as official, take it as a real map that is being, you know, used as us as a development roadmap. And there have been a few times where people have come into that thread or have been in other conversations in other spaces where, you know, there's certainly been some confusion about it because of how great it looks. You know, it is awesome. It is a great map, but it can be confusing if you're trying to figure out what is real, what is ideation, what is creativity, you know, when it comes to something produced by the player community. So when I see that confusion in those spaces, I do try to just drop in and just remind people that this is not an official map. It is great for conversation. It looks great, but it does not indicate what we are doing officially. Even though there have been some guesses in there that have been accurate, in general, it is not something that we go off of when we are building, you know, our own plans for our direction in terms of landscape and narrative. Alrighty, let's see. We just went past Dol Amroth. We can see there in the distance. Must be a rainy day on my server right now because things are a little hazy and a little overcast. I don't think this is the actual day file that we had set up. So this might be actually this might be cloudy day. This might be cloudy day that's going on right now, not rainy day. Alrighty, while I continue on my journey, let's see what else we have. Hecky Staffman says, how many developers are currently working on Lotro? Somewhere between not enough and too many. There's that scale. Let's see. Do you know if anyone has ever completed the Easy Fish, etc. in the festival? I'm not sure about that. Festivals, we've had a recent kind of resurgence in interest from the developer perspective in kind of refreshing some of our festivals. That's why we introduced Further Home as an option for our festival spaces. You know, I think things like Wistmead and Winter Home are very successful because they're kind of a like fun, self-contained interlude from the game. And the nice thing about those is they give you kind of like space to have a kind of thing that we don't wouldn't normally put in a existing landscape space, right? They can be a little bit more self-contained. They can be something that we like control the populations on a little bit better too to help with performance, which is awesome. Um, so yeah, I think the person who is working on festival stuff may be aware of the answer to your question. I personally am not aware of the answer to that question. So let's see. Wet Cowboy says, "Can we request the hobby horse mount for future roads of Middle Earth?" I don't see why not, though there may be instances where I'm writing that I will get dismounted because we don't allow it everywhere. Across the water we go. This is one of my favorite water types. Just that kind of like light blue, very reflective. Caldorian, I assume you're on the admin server. As stated, the servers will be down for like 8 hours. Yes, I am running this on my own local system. Usually everyone who is a developer on the game is kind of expected to have a local environment set up so that they can do their own like unit testing. They can get in because there is this is something I've talked about with our instance designers too. There's a very distinct difference between the perspective you see something at in our world building and level design tools versus what you actually see in client. And it's one thing to like pop into the space in our level editor and like check out what it looks like and think, great, the scale is awesome. And it's another to actually be in the space. And by being in the space, you see how your character relates to it, how your, you know, distance covered is like it's just a different experience. I think world designers are somewhat accustomed to acknowledge that difference in scale and position. It's a little bit harder for other groups that are not as kind of steeped in that as we are to be able to look at something and know if it feels like it's the right fit and whatnot. So it's something that we have conversations about somewhat often is making sure that we are not just looking at things in World Builder or in Client, but we're kind of looking at them both so that we can get a good sense of those things. Um, that first age artist says, "What settings do you have to see landscape, distant fog, trees without reloading textures all the time? Is it all just maxed out? Or are there tricks to bypass the system limitations in the menu?" Right now, I am just running this on graphics quality 6. Excuse me. You might see some popping and flickering, particularly landscape appearing and disappearing as I'm running around, and that's as things load and unload. Part of that is because I'm running on a admin client that's a little bit weightier, a little bit heavier, and some aspects of it take a little bit longer to load. Where there are other things where it might, pop in better because certain information is cached a little bit differently, or my client has a little bit different access to different things in order to be able to perform admin functions. So you could see there was that blip in the far terrain, and that's just as things were loading and unloading. I know that doesn't specifically answer your question, but yeah, this is quality level 6, which I forget what the language for it is, but it's one of the canned quality settings. It's not something that I've tweaked settings on at all. Ekel Doran says, Drahan says, where the last three festivals were expanded, someone on Mary mentioned that if it would be possible to become a permanent thing, if at all possible. So I think with festivals, part of the specialness of them is that they are not always around. Because if they were always around, then they kind of just become like your pie quest. They become your Shire experience. They become your Barrow Down, where it's just like it's always there, and it's kind of a little bit less exciting, right? Like you wanna have something that comes in and then goes away every so often, just to kind of build a little bit of anticipation for it, a little bit of excitement for it, a little bit of wonder behind it. Because if it's happening all the time, it's not interesting, it's not exciting, it's not something that you look at and think like, oh, like maybe I'll do this today instead of what I normally do, because it's just always there, right? And it's a good stuff like that is a good way to drive or to encourage communities to come together and play together as well, right? Like if everyone knows, oh hey, anniversary festival is happening or harvest math festival is happening, it's a way for people to organize and do something special. And so I think, we might do encores of festivals every so often, and actually getting to the physical space might be something that is something that happens as a static part, but the actual content associated with it, things like the questing and the event stuff, is not likely to be something that is a permanent fixture that is always available. Just because festivals, kind of by their definition, need to be special. They need to be temporary in order to maintain that specialness. All right. So as I mentioned, this is my local system. For those of you that are watching and might be a little confused about seeing me in client right now, this is not a live world. This is a local environment that I'm running around and doing this stream on. Let's see. All right. So Lionheart asks, what's your favorite enemy camp non-instanced in the game? So there are certainly some that have the nostalgic charm to them. Things like Non-Lothren, Fornost, the Blood Swamp, which are effectively just really, really big monster camps. And those aren't the sort of thing that we really build anymore because, I remember playing through each of those areas on a live character when the game launched, and how long it would take to get through them. And it's not like the camps were necessarily all that challenging, but if there was something that you needed at the end of that camp, it would just take you so long to get there that it was kind of disincentivizing to do those camps. I think one of my favorite ones that I've built is there are a couple ones there's a goblin camp in Greenfields in the Shire, and then the spider camp in the Rath Tarig. And I say they're my favorite camps that I've built anyways, in large part because of nostalgia, because at least the initial iterations of those camps were very heavy on kind of some scripted behaviors, enemies supporting each other, calling in reinforcements, those sorts of things, which were like really kind of fun and interesting when you think about it from a single player perspective, but really disruptive when it came to multiple people being in the camp, whether that meant that multiple people kind of trivialized what was going on in the camp, or someone would be in a spot totally unrelated to where the event would be triggering, but the reinforcements would just come in out of nowhere and steamroll them instead of steamrolling the person that triggered the reinforcements. So there's like, it's nostalgic in like, I was having a lot of fun building them, but also I know that that's not great gameplay when you're thinking about multiple people in a space. You want a little bit of predictability. I think one of the things that I've enjoyed more so about making monster camps recently is playing around with, uh, we'll say, systems of randomization, I guess. Um, Finding ways to try to make monster camps feel a little bit different when you go into them multiple times. Some of that is randomizing the enemy spawns in those spaces a little bit here and there. I'm not going that way. Um, this is the mountain up here, just as a quick aside. This mountain up here was also one of the areas that we were contemplating doing further expansion on. Pushing further, a little further up in, having a little bit of a snowy capped, misty mountain-esque area as part of the as part of King's Gondor. But digress, we did not get there. But anyways, I think for me, those are the camps that, as a player, I find engaging and interesting, where I am not completely autopiloting through the camp in the same way every time I go to visit. Wildwood was a space where I was really trying to make each camp feel like it was a little bit living, and that the ownership of the camp, what animals, what creatures, what humanoids were occupying that camp, like they were contesting with themselves through it, as much as you were going through and contesting them. So the randomization there. A lot of the monster camps that we've been building over the last couple of years on landscape kind of have some of that principle as well, where we're trying to build towards, where I'm encouraging building towards something that feels a little less predictable, but not so wholly unpredictable that you go in one time and completely roll over the camp, and then you go in the next time and get stomped by it. Um, but yeah, that's the kind of camp experience that I personally enjoy most. The stuff that feels like a little bit different each time you're in. Green Tea says, "What are your thoughts on refreshing the look, textures, hold on, a little bit on older objects in the game, such as environmental assets and buildings?" I think there are a number of assets that we could consider that for. Um, Particularly, the way we originally built things was not, for a lot of buildings anyways, was not really supportive of modular design. And often there are some times where it's like you look at a building in Brie and the number of textures needed for that one building is kind of ridiculous, when we could use, fewer textures to achieve the same look, sort of thing. And I think there's an opportunity for that, going forward, as we find things that we might want to address. One of the things that we actually did for Rivendell housing is, we started using the existing elf structures that we had as our base. And those are the same structures that are used in, same structures that are used in Thalithorn housing. So those were our base. That was kind of our starting point. And then, in looking at those, going through kind of the art review process and thinking about what things do we want to change, we thought, okay, well, let's figure out what structures we're using now, evaluate them, see what they're doing as far as texture stuff goes. And then ultimately what we decided to do was take a small subset of those building structures and kind of re-topologize them, rebuild them. So they now have higher quality looking models. They have higher quality textures that also are a bit more modular, so that if we wanted to, say, go through and do a larger revamp on the elf set, we have a foundation that we can use to then update all of those old elf buildings to the new means. So I think that's something that we're definitely aware of, thinking about. That's kind of what we want to do. But like so many things, it is about finding the time to do it. All right. Let's see. Nizumet says, or actually, we'll go Zbarb, then Nizumet. Zbarb says, was the Watcher in the Water drowned during In the Water Drowned treasury changed? After repeatedly failing, watched some older bids and it behaves very differently. And none of the bids, they got pulled into the water, yet to me it does immediately and repeatedly. I'm not sure about that. You know, that's a little bit of an older instance now. I'm not sure if there have been changes that have been made to it recently. I know that there was a bunch of stuff that was changed as far as balance and whatnot goes for the instances, the multiplayer instances. I think the one you're talking about is more for the epic story through Moria. So I'm not sure if that has changed or if any skills that were changed for the Watcher raid might have had a trickle down effect into that instance. I'm not familiar enough to be able to knowledgeably answer that for you. Nizumet says, is it possible in the future to see island-type homes in terms of size in other areas of Middle-earth? And please add Khand and Rune in your future expansions. So we have no shortage of ideas for homes. There have been ideas of, like, you know, having a personal island, a private island, having boat houses, having apartments, having victory gardens, all sorts of different settings for houses. There is absolutely no shortage. So it is, and those are all just a matter of time when we get there. And similar to those, that housing question, I feel like Khand and Rune are both, when we get there, you know, it's a matter of time kind of thing, not necessarily will we ever. Because we know that those are also important and exciting places to visit, and I wouldn't be shocked if once we've finished up our tour of Harad, we start turning our attention towards other areas of the world that we have not yet gone to. Get That asks, what's your favorite area in the game? Well, I think, you know, I had mentioned before a fondness for what we'd done in the Vales of Anduin and Wells of Langflood. I think in terms of like mountains and forests, I feel very comfortable in those areas. I really enjoyed making Swanfleet and Cardolan. It's one of those things where I was able to take from the ground up and implement new concepts for landscape development, and bring those to life in those regions. And I feel like those are some of the most visually successful spaces that we've created. So yeah, I'm also really happy with how Ureshtar turned out. I think that provides a kind of environment that we haven't built before. And I think that's always fun and exciting to do, is like build things that you've never built before. All right, we'll take a quick detour here to take a look at Melgobas as we approach. Davey says, I wish there was an expansion for Nirn and that other area of Mordor previously unseen. There's actually, there's a substantial portion of Mordor that hasn't been seen. And I wouldn't be shocked if we got there at some point. Not necessarily in the very near future, but at some point. All right. So Mr. Alex says, will you ever fix the bug that loads wrong textures on rocks? For example, the cliffs in Northdown are brown in the Gates of Angmar, and then you go closer and some of those rocks become gray-dark. So that is a byproduct of us several years ago trying to make changes to how our rocks behave in order to improve performance. In the background, in our engine, we have this concept of things that are unique and things that are shared. Anything that is unique, as far as our engine is concerned, if it's unique, that means that the server or client needs to kind of care about treating each individual instance of it, each place that we've placed it, as its own distinct object as far as tracking and whatnot goes. If something's shared, kind of all object of that one type, so if it's rock A, all versions of that rock with that name are treated as kind of the same object in terms of rendering goes, and all the server and client really need to care about is, beyond that is the position. And this is high level, like super simple way of explaining it. So what happens with those rocks is that we change them from all being unique to all being shared. So you have every version of rock A that we've placed of that specific name is a shared rock now. The problem with that is if there are some texture properties applied to one of those rocks that gets loaded into your client's memory, it thinks that that property should be applied to all versions of that rock as long as that information remains in your client's memory. So that's where you run into the issue where like you'll be moving along, and then rocks looks fine. You'll teleport somewhere else, and then the rocks that are in the area that you went to now look like they have the textures of the area you were just in. And so the solution to that is basically us going to the locations that those issues occur in and manually replacing the rocks in that region that might have previously been shared and thus have appearance properties, texture properties, and whatnot set on them, replacing them with versions of those rocks that are static, shared, that only have that texture on them, no like per item proper or per asset properties. And the tricky thing with that sometimes too is when those issues are reported, we kind of need to know both where you were and where you are. Where were you that, the snowy rock that you were seeing snowy rocks as expected, and then where did you go where you're now seeing, Breland rocks being snowy, for example, so that we can go to both locations, change out the rocks that we're using in both of those locations, and go forward. This is what I recently did this kind of pass in Rohan. I went through and replaced a bunch of rocks. There were some side effects there where I have accidentally, replaced some rocks with the incorrect kind of rocks, those sorts of things. But those also had been fixed. Those have also been fixed since then. But that's kind of like what we need to do to fix it. It is not just a push a button to fix. It's like we have to go to the location, change out all of the rocks, scrub the like old properties off them so that they in turn don't pollute other rocks of that type, that sort of thing. So it's not a, quick, simple, just do it all in one batch thing. We need to know the locations through bug reports and whatnot so that we can go in and actually address the issues. Fish Girl says, any chance to see old reward track items for housing in Lalia's Market? That's actually something we discussed a little bit in the housing interview that we did with Yao last week. It's definitely an idea that's been in my head. It's something that we need to discuss internally a little bit more before we decide whether or not that is the way we want to go, because there is potentially the opportunity for like reward track encores and whatnot, and if some of those things become reliable to get, then the desire to have the encores is less. So it is a balance of figuring out kind of what we want to do as far as whether or not reward tracks will return first. And then after we've made that decision, we can decide whether or not we want to um, bring those old reward track items out into Lalia's market. Oh, hey, crazy ox trying to get to a spot. Dagger Thief, are we able to get snowy grounds for housing when we already have day files? So changing the actual terrain for housing is not likely to be feasible. We have some housing items that will kind of like spit out decals that look like snow, but actually changing the terrain, the trees, the grass, etc., in your housing plot, not something our system supports. Um, Snowy areas as a housing neighborhood, something like Winterhome as a housing neighborhood, is more likely than allowing people the ability to, kind of tailor the appearance of their homes in that way. And that's just because a lot of this kind of information, the rocks that you see here, the terrain textures, that's all baked in and not dynamic. Loncurian was probably my favorite city to build. I had a lot of fun building this. And part of it's because, I was trying to approach the construction of this city as though it was an actual like city. How would the roads work? How are the villages? What about buildings next to each other? How do overpasses and underpasses work? Like all of those things were stuff that I was thinking about in building this space, and I was really enjoying kind of getting into that kind of detail work here. I'm really glad too that I think we had a new designer join the team, and one of their kind of like kickoff, learn the tools thing was they got to go through and build a bunch of new quests for Loncurian, which I felt like was very, very much needed because I just felt like there was not as much going on here as I would have liked there to have been for how like big this city ended up being. Let's see. Noriaz says your local copy has all or almost all quests, NPCs, location, etc. as the live version. So I am running what is called a dev build. So that means whatever we are currently working on that is not available on live is in this build. So things like what we're building for the expansion pack, for example, that is a part of this build. I'm not going to show you those things because we are not in preview season yet, but this is our live build, or our dev build. So this is internal in progress stuff. Obier says we need more houses with doors too. The good doors to tell story with slowly ends in your 4th guild advent calendar. The tricky thing about building a lot of interiors and spaces is it's just extra work. Not that we don't have a desire to include those sorts of things, but often when you go to a space that has a lot of interiors, it's usually because whatever world designer was building that space had enough free time in their schedule to go through and build out all of them. Loncurian, for example, has a ton of interiors in it, and I kind of went crazy on that. But other cities and whatnot don't have as many. And a lot of that is because, we have to weigh, like, do we have the time for it? What other things do we need to build while we're working on stuff, like those sorts of things. So I think we certainly kind of all agree that it would be nice to have more of those, whether they are functional spaces for content or if they are purely just for role playing, we would love to have more of them, but we also don't always have the time to build them. Max Velmate says, will there be some kind of graphic update in the near future? I'm assuming you're talking about the stuff that had been talked about years ago, that is no longer on our plates as far as things that we would be doing for the game. We are always trying to find ways and places to improve the visual fidelity of the game in ways that make sense and don't overburden the game. Things like coming up with new material types to better allow us to customize how we make things, improving the avatars, like those are the kind of visual updates that I would say you should expect to see. If by visual update you mean overhaul the game, put it on Unreal 5, non-starter. We are not planning on that right now. I think when a lot of people think about graphics updates and that's what they hear, that's kind of the direction their brain takes them, is just wholesale engine swap. And that is a very considerable amount of work to accomplish. And it's daunting. And there's a reason why we stepped back from the like graphics update stuff that we were talking about a couple of years ago, because when we were looking at it, we were evaluating. It's like that is a lot of work to do while also maintaining the game. It's a lot of expensive work to do while also maintaining the game. So expect more like individual graphics getting, individual models and artwork getting update, player avatars getting updates, the new textures that we're using, those sorts of things. More so than any sort of grand engine replacement. All right, let's see. That's First Stage Artist says, what would be cool in housing in the future? Be able to display regular items just like we can with mounts. Have a lot of obsolete and old legacy LIs. Their models look really cool. I feel like doing a museum of your own player history would be really fun. So we started putting some of those old legendary item cosmetics into Lalia's Market. So some of them are there. I don't think those are things that you can hook in your house. But it might be something where in the future we could come up with a system to allow you to convert those kinds of cosmetic items into something that works with the housing system. Quixotic Parody says, all that passed up ore is killing me. Oh, this ore right here, that iridescent ore, we're gonna leave that. I'll leave that there for you, Quixotic. That's all yours. You can stop on by once the servers are back up, and you can go mine that. Juniper Bush says, what's something you'd love to implement but can't due to the game engine's limitation, like fantasy tier? So I think one of the things that a new renderer would be awesome. Something that leverages the things we can do with modern technology, getting new pathing systems, new physics systems. Like I think just in general, we're building a game that is of its time, but we're trying our best to make it look and feel amazing. And I do think that there are there are components of that would be great to upgrade and would benefit us all. Some of them might be more feasible than others, but I think it's those component parts, trying to modernize those component parts would be great if we ever had the time and budget and expertise to do so. All right. Saltre says artificial lights on the ground frequently flicker. For example, in Dale, in the market plaza at night, the whole terrain light flickers when you move the camera around. What causes this bug? That's likely a byproduct of too many light sources, um, and it's something that we've addressed here and there when we've received bugs on them. If that is an issue that's happening in Dale itself. Certainly, please, by all means, file a bug so we can investigate. Our engine, objects in our engine, including the landscape, each tile of landscape is considered one object, can only have a certain number of lights influencing it. Once that number is exceeded, the engine kind of has to decide what light it cuts out. And often, it will regularly, randomly decide frequently what light will cut out and cut in. So that's how you get the light flickering. It's just the engine kind of fighting with itself over what to keep and what to ditch. Which is part of why whenever players ask about lights in housing and wanting more, that is why I am very cautious about adding more lights into housing, because it can very quickly turn into something where you have that flickering experience happen. Jolie Rondell says, I hear there are graphics issues still in Fasach Laron, area of Angmar. Could it be the vegetation and rocks added to the cliff faces, affecting the smoothness, blacking out sometimes? That we still have not. I know that the blackout happens there for some people. We still have not really had a good, solid reproduction for that issue. And without a good solid reproduction where it's like I could log into my server right now, go to that location and make it happen, it's really hard for us to address the issues. One of the things that we've been putting a lot of effort into, in part because of the conversion over to 64-bit servers, 64-bit clients and whatnot, is improving the tools that we have to better tell the story of performance, whether it's server performance, client performance, all of those things, so that if we're looking at a space, even if we're not necessarily able to specifically pinpoint it, it gives us some information that we can maybe start working towards. For Angmar itself, this bug has been kind of the bane of my existence, because I haven't personally ever reproduced it on a live world. I've never seen it happen for myself. Not saying that it doesn't exist, but I haven't seen it happen for myself, so I don't have an insight of oh, well, just as right before this happened, this other thing happened, that sort of thing. So, tracking down bugs like that requires a lot of detective work. Sometimes it requires more qualified detectives than I am to start doing that work. So Pont Finberry asks, are you aware of any bug where the sky goes very faded or completely blanks out when you port into a region? That could be a byproduct of the regions just using very different styles of dayfile and things not loading correctly, or the sky configuration loading before the assets have loaded, so your client doesn't have everything. Much like the Angmar thing, there are a lot of components that could cause something like that to happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean that any one of them is an immediate smoking gun that I could point to and say that's the problem, that's the fix. Juniper Bush asks, what's the best way to report a bug? We have a bug reporting tool through the forums that you can use. I don't know if we have the link available to it on the Discord as well, but on the forums there is a way to report bugs. As Druid's Fire just posted right after you asked that. And the Ecstasy of Gold says, huge respect to all of you at SSG. You squeezed everything you can out of the engine, I think. There are so many places where the view is so phenomenal. Looks like a painting. Amazing. And I certainly appreciate that. It's always nice to see people appreciate the hard work that we do, and I think the style that we're trying to keep the game at visually kind of helps us. I've always been of the perspective that good art direction will always be better than chasing the latest, greatest graphics features. Because if you have a solid art direction, that game will hold up regardless of generational changes in hardware. Whereas if the visuals of something are all about just the latest graphics features, I feel like it's always easier for products like that to feel less modern as new things come out. So bells and whistles is no replacement for solid art direction at the end of the day. All right. There's a question about not being able to jump. I'm unfamiliar with that, and also probably wouldn't be something that I can specifically answer. So I'm just going to go through what's left of the questions real quick, and then we'll wrap up the stream today. How do I get a Hobbit jetpack? And if I can't, why do other players have Hobbit jetpacks? Players should not have Hobbit jetpacks. What you may be seeing is a physics bug that should be mostly resolved, though if there are locations where it is occurring, please report that. But Hobbit jetpack is something for admins only. I use that if I need to get up a cliff while I'm doing a stream like this. And let's see. The Ultimate Kyle says Lon Curian was such a nice town. It's a shame really how little time we stay there for quests and stories. Maybe that's a good spot for another festival. Or a good launching point for future destinations. And all right. Green Tea asks, have you considered adding rooms that are behind a loading screen to housing? That way, it seems all the hooks wouldn't need to be loaded immediately upon entering the house, and it would allow for more hooks in general. That's not necessarily how our game handles that data, because as long as you're in that land block, it still needs to be loaded. It may not be visually loading on your client, but it still needs to be loaded on this as far as the server is concerned, because it needs to be able to know what to display when you turn that corner. So it wouldn't necessarily solve the problem. All right. And there's a bunch of little stuff, some stuff that I definitely cannot answer or should not answer. But we are almost done with the list. I'm going through things quickly. All right. So Holiday Guy says, why do we spawn under Lindleby housing when loading into a big kin house and it's loading everything inside? That's probably because when your character is placed, the floor underneath him has not yet placed. We have some ways that we could address that, and that's something that if I have a bug for it, I'll make a note for myself, that we can try to put a static object, because the floors, since you can change the textures on them, are dynamic, so they load a little bit differently. But if we have a static object underneath you that's kind of baked into the land block, hopefully that one would prevent you from falling through. So it's something that we can look into addressing. All right. Let's see. All right. Well, I think at this point we're a little over time. I'm going to wrap up the stream because there are a lot of questions that are being asked, a lot of them that I should not be answering. So thank you everyone for hanging out here, taking the tour through. So I want to talk very briefly about the stream schedule for the next like couple of months, just so that you all are aware. Preview season for the expansion pack will be starting soon. We're not going to have the usual We Have a Cave Troll stream that we would have on our second Thursday of every month. We're gonna skip that one, and in a few weeks from now, and we'll announce when. We're going to kick off expansion pack previews with a We Have a Cave Troll stream where Orion, Alan Mackey, and I will kind of sit down and talk about what to expect out of the expansion pack. Following that stream, we will be doing weekly streams previewing the four regions that are being introduced as part of the expansion pack. We've got Adagim, Kijan, Ansharu, and Idagal. So we'll be giving each of those a stream, and then we'll wrap it all up with a final stream that is a instance and interior space stream. And that should lead into the expansion pack. So pay attention to announcements on things like the message boards, on Discord, on social media, even emails. If there are announcements regarding those sorts of things, they might show up in your email as well regarding what's coming up for the expansion pack. So that's where we're at with our upcoming streams. It's going to be a busy few weeks once those start going. So thank you everyone for hanging out, asking your questions, and joining me on the roads out here into now Peneth Gelen. Once we're done with preview streams, we'll get back to the roads. I think there are a few more areas that we have not traveled yet, so we'll make sure we cover those before we figure out what our next themes for streams are. So thank you everyone. I hope you all have a great afternoon. And yeah, we'll see you soon.